Hi all, James here. If I'm being extra quiet today, it's because it's actually 7 a.m. as I'm recording this in the morning, and there's other people asleep in the house, so I'm trying not to disturb them. Now, normally I'm not up this early, but for whatever reason I couldn't sleep, so I checked my phone about 6:30, something like that, and I find Dutch Mantel has texted me, and other people had texted me as well, saying that Bray Wyatt, Wyndham Rotunda, had unexpectedly died yesterday. Coming off the heels of Terry Funk's passing a couple of days early, this is turning out to be one of the more horrendous weeks in the history of wrestling, quite frankly. And if my eyes are darting back and forth, you'll have to forgive me because I've got a big script here that I'm going to be reading through. Triple H broke this news some 7 hours ago as I record this, saying the following. Just received a call from WWE Hall of Famer Mike Rotunda, who informed us of the tragic news that our WWE family member for life, Wyndham Rotunda, also known as Bray Wyatt, unexpectedly passed away earlier today. Our thoughts are with his family, and we ask that everyone respect their privacy at this time. Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful then was later given permission to release the following information about 2 hours later. I was given permission to reveal that earlier this year Wyndham Rotunda Bray Wyatt got COVID that exacerbated a heart issue. There was a lot of positive progress towards a return and his recovery. Unfortunately, today he suffered a heart attack and passed away. Hearing that news this morning was almost unbelievable, so I suspect if you've heard this before this video came out, you'll feel pretty much the same way. It's an absolute shock to the system, and it feels very similar to me, into my mind, when the news that John Huber, aka Brody Lee, aka Luke Harper, had died of a lung condition, a rare lung condition called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, because aside from a few people in the know and the company that they were working for at the time, the wider public were completely oblivious to the fact that he'd been sick in the first place. Not only was the passing unexpected, but his father, Mike Rotunda, best known as IRS, told Bill Apter for Sportskeeda less than 2 weeks ago the following. You read a lot of stuff on the internet, which I wouldn't believe a lot of, or in my case, any of it. Bray Wyatt, I'm sure he will return to WWE hopefully shortly, and we'll go from there. Now that's an important thing to mention, as a high proportion of fans looking on the outside, including myself, had come to their own conclusions as to why Bray Wyatt's character had suddenly disappeared from WWE television back in February of this year. So a little bit of history of the last year and of the 6 months that Bray Wyatt had been in WWE since his return at autumn 2022. Now, he was a rehire of Triple H's at the time when Vince McMahon had done his fake retirement, and Triple H was rehiring a lot of people that he'd fired back in 2021 and 2020 for budgetary reasons. Now, why would budgetary reasons come into it when WWE is so profitable? Well, it seems that Vince McMahon was trying to make WWE even more profitable on paper, because unbeknownst to a lot of people, but speculated widely, was that he was preparing for a sale of WWE and cutting Bray Wyatt's $4 million a year contract out of the budget would go a tiny bit of the way to making WWE more profitable on paper. Now, as I said before, Bray returned in September. They were doing these White Rabbit, the White Rabbit song by Jefferson Airplane, and putting QR codes up, heralding the return of Bray. And after several weeks of boosted ratings on SmackDown, after Bray turns up, and there was a lot of intrigue, the Wyatt story arc reintroduced Alexa Bliss as one of Bray's followers, and the infamous Uncle Howdy, and the only wrestler who benefited from the story ultimately was LA Knight, who was going through a character change himself after the Maximum Male Models debacle. But then the storyline started stalling, and then the intrigue from the fans were waning, and Bray never really actually wrestled on television. I say really, he never wrestled on television, in fact. Instead, making less than a dozen in-ring appearances in that 6-month span on Dark, on SmackDown shows after they ended, and they were the dark matches that he was involved in, or house show appearances where he wrestled Jinder Mahal or LA Knight. And when I say not televised, there was one broadcast match that Bray was involved in at the Royal Rumble pay-per-view or premium live event or whatever they're calling it now, against LA Knight in the Mountain Dew Pitch Black match, which was sort of the arena's lights were darkened and then all the weapons were sprayed with that day glow stuff that they have in like Laser Quest and Laser Tag. And also featured a diving stunt by Uncle Howdy. The match itself wasn't well received. And then in the run-up to WrestleMania, Bray was put into a feud with Bobby Lashley. And, you know, for everybody keeping tabs on it and watching, including myself, it was really, really odd how the match was starting to be built up, because there was a video with Bray Wyatt doing a muscle man dance to mock Bobby Lashley. And then that was the last that we actually saw of Bray Wyatt. It never got kicked into high gear. We know now why, but all we saw was this muscle man video. And then on SmackDown, Bobby Lashley out of the blue destroys Uncle Howdy. Uncle Howdy rushes the ring, and Bobby Lashley just messes him up. And that's the last we see of that character, which seemed so odd at the time. And then the next week, Lashley on Raw says, hey, I went to SmackDown, I want to face you man-to-man, and you didn't do it. And that was it, which was a really odd, essentially dropping of the entire angle, and just a scorched earth policy of the 6 months of creative that had come before it. So Bobby Lashley then had no opponent for WrestleMania, and Bray Wyatt had nothing going into WrestleMania because nothing was said about him. He just completely disappeared off television entirely. Now, without a reason given, speculation ran rampant as to why Bray Wyatt was no longer on WWE, with a number of theories given as to why. Now, many people figured that there was a creative dispute between Bray Wyatt and WWE, and he'd walked away from a WrestleMania payday over it. Now, this is actually what I thought as well as many others. Now, this is not far-fetched, because it was only a few months removed from Naomi and Sasha Banks doing the same thing. They were unhappy with creative. I think they were the women's tag champs at the time. They threw the belts on the desk and told Triple H, I believe, that they just weren't doing whatever they wanted them to do, and then they left, and then they never returned. So, and given more credence to that theory, is that the creative built up around Bray over the last 6 months prior was just destroyed. So that's a lot of people, I suggest, was probably thinking that. Similarly, Bo Dallas and Alexa Bliss's last appearances, because they were revolving around Bray Wyatt as well, they were no longer on TV. But in Alexa Bliss's case, I think she was trying to get pregnant at the time, which therefore she couldn't wrestle. And another rumour that was advanced was that Bray was going through a period of depression, and this could have coincided with creative differences, or maybe he was just going through depression, but that was another theory that was advanced at the time. Now, there were also rumours that Bray was injured. The injury line was harder to believe because Bray had wrestled so little, and if he was indeed hurt, WWE would have likely mentioned it, made a public statement on it, and then given a time frame for a return, and then picked up on the Bray Wyatt story arc where it left off. Or at least they wouldn't have destroyed what had come before it, and then they would have just started afresh with Bray Wyatt and whatever Bray and WWE had come up with together. Now, I actually want to mention, because I just forgot to mention this before, with Bray Wyatt's character, it's believed that he had creative input on it as well. So this similarly gives credence to the fact that maybe WWE were punishing him by, as I say, doing the scorched earth policy of all the storylines that have come before it. And similarly, he was working closely with one member of WWE writing team who was also let go around the WrestleMania time. I can't remember if it was beforehand or after, but he was also let go at the time. So this is why the rumours constantly pointed towards creative differences rather than something else. As I said before, the injury line was less believable because he'd wrestled so little, but then, to give an example with CM Punk, he'd barely wrestled and got injured so many times as well, so it's not out of all reasonable speculation to think that that was true. But tragically, the real answer as to why he was gone from WWE was the most awful, which was sickness. Now, on August 10th, Sean Ross Sapp of Fightful confirmed that Wyatt had indeed been dealing with severe long-term health issues. So he tweets this on August 10th. After today's update, it was explained to Fightful that the illness that Bray Wyatt is actively recovering from was both career and life-threatening. But he offered no more details from it. And this news was released fairly quietly. And it's something that I never picked up on a couple of weeks ago. Now, while it is for the most part not in the public consciousness anymore these days, COVID has been responsible for an increase in heart-related issues, especially in the first year when the disease was most potent and vaccines had not yet to be developed, causing a spike in cardiovascular disease. Those, particularly who had already underlying heart issues or otherwise were susceptible to cardiovascular disease, were and still can have these issues exacerbated after catching COVID. And sadly, it seems that was the case with Bray Wyatt, Wyndham Rotunda, the real person, not the character, who was making a recovery, it seems, as has been reported, and was not far from returning to WWE, and then all of a sudden suffers a heart attack, a fatal heart attack. My condolences to Wyndham Rotunda's family, his surviving family, which includes 4 children, his fiancée, Josanne Offerman, his father Mike, Uncle Barry Wyndham, brother Taylor, aka Bo Dallas, and sister Mika. And that's it, really. So thank you very much for watching, and my condolences to the family.